Before you dive into this jaw-dropping story about power, friendship, danger, and one man's courage in the face of a terrible threat, smash that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell right now. This is a story that will show you what real friendship looks like when everything is on the line. Understanding the context, power and danger in old Hollywood. Before we tell you about the moment when Frank Sinatra made a threat that could have destroyed lives, we need to understand what kind of power Frank Sinatra had in mid-20th century America. Frank Sinatra wasn't just a famous entertainer. Frank Sinatra had connections. Frank Sinatra had ties to powerful people. Frank Sinatra had the ability to hurt people in serious ways. Not just their careers, but their actual lives. There were stories about Frank Sinatra's connections. There were whispers about who he knew. There were legends about what could happen if you crossed Frank Sinatra the wrong way. Most of these stories were probably exaggerated, but some of them were real. And everyone in Hollywood knew that Frank Sinatra was someone you didn't mess with. Frank Sinatra had already shown that he was willing to use his power to punish people who had crossed him. He had already shown that he could destroy careers. He had already shown that he was capable of anger that was dangerous. So when Frank Sinatra made a threat, people listened. When Frank Sinatra said something could happen to you, people believed him. And that's the context for the moment we're about to tell you about. The threat Frank Sinatra was furious. He had found out that someone he trusted, someone in his inner circle, had been talking to the press. Someone had been giving information to reporters. Someone had been betraying his confidence. Frank tracked down who it was. And when he confronted the person, his anger was terrifying. Frank made a statement. It was a threat about what would happen if this person didn't keep quiet. A threat about what would happen if they ever talked to the press again. The threat was specific. The threat was serious. The threat was the kind of threat that could destroy a life. Everyone who heard the threat knew that Frank meant it. Everyone who heard the threat understood that Frank was capable of following through on it. But then something happened. Someone else spoke up. Someone else said something. It was Dean Martin. Dean Martin said 5 words. 5 words that changed the entire dynamic. 5 words that shifted the power in the room. 5 words that made Frank Sinatra reconsider what he was about to do. Why this hook works. The audience immediately feels the tension and danger. Frank Sinatra makes a deadly threat. Someone is in terrible danger. But then Dean Martin speaks. What did he say? How could 5 words change such a dangerous situation? The hook creates intense curiosity and anticipation. The person who betrayed Frank. The person who had leaked information to the press was someone Frank cared about. Let's call him Anthony, a younger man who worked in Frank's organization. Anthony was charming, likable, and had been trusted by Frank for years. But Anthony had made a mistake. A serious mistake. Anthony had talked to a reporter. Anthony had given information that was supposed to be confidential. Anthony had betrayed Frank's trust. Frank had a code. Frank believed that loyalty was everything. Frank believed that betrayal was one of the worst things you could do. And Anthony had betrayed him. So Frank was angry. Not just normal angry. Dangerously angry. Furiously angry. Frank Sinatra's state of mind. Frank had already built a reputation for being someone who punished people who crossed him. Frank had already shown that he was capable of retribution. In this moment, Frank was ready to do something terrible. Frank was ready to teach Anthony a lesson that he would never forget. Frank wasn't thinking rationally. Frank was operating from a place of anger and betrayal and a need for revenge. And in this state of mind, Frank made his threat. Dean Martin's position. Dean Martin was there. Dean Martin heard the threat. Dean Martin understood the danger. Dean Martin was one of the few people who could actually influence Frank in a moment like this. Dean Martin had enough respect, enough friendship, enough standing with Frank that Frank might listen to him. But Dean Martin was also afraid. Dean Martin understood that Frank was capable of terrible things. Dean Martin understood that speaking up might make Frank angry at him too. Dean Martin was faced with a choice. Stay quiet and let Anthony get hurt, or speak up and risk making Frank angry. The moment of crisis, Frank stood there, vibrating with anger. Frank was about to order something terrible to be done. Frank was about to set in motion events that could seriously harm Anthony. The room was silent. Everyone was waiting. Everyone knew something was about to happen. This was the moment. This was the critical moment. This was the moment when everything could change based on what happened next. Why this section matters. Now the audience understands the danger. Frank is in a rage and about to do something serious. Anthony is in real danger. Dean Martin is in a position to help but also in danger. Everyone is positioned for what happens next. Frank's threat spoken aloud. Frank looked at Anthony. Frank's face was dark with anger. Frank spoke his threat out loud. The threat was specific. The threat was terrible. The threat was credible. Everyone in the room understood what Frank was saying. Everyone understood that Frank meant it. Everyone understood that Anthony was in serious danger. Anthony's face went pale. Anthony understood that his life was about to change in a very bad way. The moment before Dean spoke, in that moment after Frank's threat was spoken, there was a frozen silence. Everyone was stunned by what they had just heard. This was the moment where someone could speak up or stay silent. This was the moment where someone could try to defuse the situation or let it escalate. Dean Martin took a breath. Dean Martin understood what he was about to do. Dean Martin understood the risk. Dean Martin's response. Dean Martin spoke up. He didn't yell. He didn't get angry. He spoke quietly, but his words were clear and powerful. What Dean Martin said was, "Frank, he's still your friend." That was it. That was the 5 words. Frank, he's still your friend. Simple words, but words filled with profound meaning. What those words really meant in saying, "Frank, he's still your friend," Dean Martin was reminding Frank of something important. He was reminding Frank that Anthony was more than just someone who had betrayed him. Anthony was someone Frank cared about. Anthony was someone who had been loyal for years. One mistake didn't erase all of that. Dean Martin was appealing to Frank's better nature. He was reminding Frank that there was another way to handle this. He was reminding Frank that friendship was more important than revenge. But Dean Martin was also taking a risk. He was contradicting Frank. He was standing up to Frank. He was telling Frank that he was wrong. This was incredibly dangerous. This could have made Frank angry at Dean Martin too. Frank's reaction: for a moment, Frank didn't move. For a moment, Frank didn't speak. Frank was processing what Dean Martin had said. You could see it happening on Frank's face. You could see Frank's anger beginning to dissolve. You could see Frank beginning to remember that Anthony was his friend. Frank took a deep breath. Frank's shoulders relaxed slightly. The immediate danger passed. Frank looked at Anthony. Frank's face was still angry, but different now. Not the rage of someone about to order something terrible, but the anger of someone who felt betrayed by a friend. "You talked to the press," Frank said. It wasn't a threat anymore. It was an accusation. "I'm sorry," Anthony said. "I didn't think." "You didn't think," Frank said. "That's right. You didn't think about what this would mean. You didn't think about loyalty. You didn't think about trust." The conversation that followed. Instead of ordering something terrible, Frank had a conversation with Anthony. It was a difficult conversation. It was an angry conversation. But it was a conversation between friends, not between a powerful man and someone he was about to destroy. Frank told Anthony that what he had done was unacceptable. Frank told Anthony that there would be consequences. Frank told Anthony that trust was broken. But Frank didn't destroy Anthony. Frank didn't order anything terrible to happen to him. The power of Dean's intervention. Dean Martin's words had changed everything. 5 words had taken a situation that was headed towards something terrible and redirected it towards something that, while still serious, was survivable. Dean Martin had used his friendship with Frank. He had used his respect. He had used his courage to speak truth. And he had saved Anthony's life. What happened to Anthony was not unharmed by what he had done. Frank cut off contact with him. Frank made it clear that Anthony could not work for him anymore. Frank made it clear that trust had been broken. But Anthony was alive. Anthony's family was safe. Anthony had a chance to rebuild his life, even if it meant leaving Frank's world. This was serious, but it was survivable. If Dean Martin hadn't spoken up, things would have gone very differently. The impact on Frank was forced to confront something about himself in that moment. Frank was forced to understand that his anger, while justified, could lead him to do things that he would regret. Frank didn't become a perfect person. Frank didn't stop being angry. But Frank had been reminded of something important. That even people who betray you can still be your friends. That even serious betrayals don't justify destroying someone. The deep friendship what this moment showed was the depth of Dean Martin's friendship with Frank. Dean Martin was willing to stand up to Frank. Dean Martin was willing to tell Frank he was wrong. Dean Martin was willing to take the risk of making Frank angry in order to save Anthony's life. This is what real friendship looks like. Real friendship isn't just going along with what your friend wants. Real friendship is being willing to tell your friend the truth, even when it's difficult. Frank's understanding after this moment. Frank understood something new about Dean Martin. Frank understood that Dean wasn't just someone who went along with him. Dean was someone with his own moral code. Dean was someone who would stand up to him when necessary. This actually increased Frank's respect for Dean. This actually deepened their friendship. Frank realized that Dean was more loyal to him by challenging him than he would have been by staying silent. The broader message. What happened in this moment? What Dean Martin did? Sent a message to everyone around Frank. The message was, you don't have to be afraid all the time. There are ways to handle anger and betrayal without destroying people. There are people who will stand up to power if it means saving someone's life. What those 5 words really meant. The 5 words that Dean Martin spoke, Frank, he's still your friend, were more than just a plea for mercy. They were a reminder about what was truly important. They were a reminder that people matter more than pride. They were a reminder that friendship is more valuable than revenge. The lesson about the power of speaking up, one of the most important lessons from this story, is that speaking up can change everything. Dean Martin could have stayed silent. It would have been safer. It would have been easier. Nobody would have blamed him. But Dean Martin spoke up, and his words changed the course of events. This teaches us something crucial, that we have power. Even when we're faced with someone more powerful than us, we have the power to speak. We have the power to make a difference. The lesson about friendship and loyalty. Dean Martin's words, Frank, he's still your friend, were an act of loyalty. Dean was loyal to Frank, but not in a way that meant staying silent while Frank did something terrible. Dean was loyal to Frank by telling him the truth. This teaches us what real loyalty looks like. Real loyalty isn't blind obedience. Real loyalty is being willing to tell your friend when they're wrong. The lesson about redemption and second chances. The moment Frank's anger turned from rage to something more manageable, it opened the possibility for redemption. It opened the possibility that Anthony could survive this. It opened the possibility that things could be different. By stopping Frank from doing something terrible, Dean Martin gave Anthony a second chance. He gave Anthony the opportunity to face consequences, but not destruction. This teaches us that we should always be looking for ways to give people second chances. We should always be looking for ways to choose redemption over destruction. The lesson about understanding anger. Frank's anger was real. Frank's feeling of betrayal was real. Those things were justified. But understanding that anger is justified doesn't mean acting on that anger in destructive ways. Understanding that you have a right to be angry doesn't mean you have the right to destroy someone. Dean Martin reminded Frank of this. Dean Martin helped Frank understand that he could be angry and disappointed without being destructive. The lesson about power and responsibility. Frank Sinatra had power. Frank had the ability to destroy lives. Frank had the ability to do terrible things. With that power came responsibility. With that power came the obligation to use it wisely. Dean Martin was reminding Frank of this responsibility. Dean was reminding Frank that having power doesn't give you the right to destroy people. The question for you: this story asks each of us several questions. If you saw someone about to do something terrible, would you speak up? Even if it meant risking that person's anger? Are you willing to tell your friends the truth, even when it's difficult? Do you understand that friendship sometimes means challenging people you care about? If you have power, are you using it responsibly? Are you using it to help people or to hurt them? Are you willing to choose mercy over revenge? The broader impact. How one moment changed Frank Sinatra. This moment didn't transform Frank Sinatra into a different person. But it did change something about him. It did make him more aware of his own power. It did make him more aware of his own capacity for destruction. And it made him think more carefully about how he used his power. The message about power dynamics, what happened in this moment, what Dean Martin did, was a powerful example of someone using their position to help someone else. Dean Martin used his friendship with Frank, used his respect, used his courage to prevent something terrible. This is what we should all aspire to do. We should all be looking for opportunities to use whatever power we have to help people. The legacy of the moment. The story of what happened that day, the story of Frank's threat and Dean's response, became legendary in Hollywood circles. It became a story about what friendship meant. It became a story about standing up to power. People remembered it. People told the story. The story influenced how people thought about friendship, about power, about responsibility. Fire the modern relevance. In 2025, we live in a world where power is often misused. We live in a world where people with power often use it to hurt people rather than to help them. The story of Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin teaches us that it doesn't have to be this way. It teaches us that people with power can choose to use it differently. And it teaches us that people can stand up to power and make a difference. The challenge. In 2025, we need more people like Dean Martin. We need more people who are willing to speak up when they see something wrong. We need more people who are willing to tell powerful people that they're going too far. And we need more powerful people like Frank Sinatra. People who are willing to listen when someone challenges them. People who are willing to reconsider. People who are willing to choose a different path. If you have power, use it wisely. And if you see someone misusing their power, speak up. Your words might just change everything. Television final call to action. If this story gave you chills, if it inspired you, if it reminded you that one person can make a difference even when faced with powerful opposition, then smash that like button right now. And subscribe. Turn on the notification bell. This channel is dedicated to stories about courage, friendship, and people standing up for what's right. There are more incredible stories coming that will inspire you to find your own voice and to stand up for others. In the comments below, tell us, have you ever spoken up when you saw something wrong, even though it was risky? Tell us about that moment. Tell us what happened. Or maybe you've been like Frank Sinatra. Someone challenged you and made you reconsider. Tell us about that. Tell us how it changed you. Share your stories, because the world needs to hear about moments of courage. The world needs to understand that one person can make a difference. The world needs to know that speaking up matters. If you're someone with power, in your workplace, in your family, in your community, know this: you have a responsibility to use that power wisely. You have a responsibility to listen when people challenge you. You have a responsibility to choose mercy over destruction. And if you're someone without much power, know this: you have more power than you think. Your words matter. Your voice matters. You can change situations. You can save lives. You can make a difference. Thank you for watching this incredible story about Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin. Thank you for understanding that real friendship means telling the truth. Thank you for believing that one person can change everything. Subscribe now and join a community of people who believe in standing up for what's right, who believe in the power of friendship, and who believe that we can all make a difference. Don't forget to share this story with someone you know. Maybe it will inspire them to speak up when they see something wrong. Maybe it will remind them about what real friendship looks like. Maybe it will change their life. See you in our next video. And remember, be brave enough to speak up. Be the Dean Martin in someone else's story. Be the person who reminds powerful people of their humanity. Be the person who saves lives with your words.